I remember I got to a point where I'm looking at the women in the church that I was a part of. And every single Sunday, it was the same thing. Women, the same women coming to the altar, coming up for prayer. God, please pray for my husband. My husband's not saved. My children aren't saved, and they're cutting up, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Please help me with a job. Help me get a car. Help me get a husband. Help me, help me, help me, help me, help me. Every single Sunday. And it got to the point where I said, are you kidding me? If we're coming to this altar every single Sunday, we're getting people laying hands on us, people putting oil on our heads, we're, dancing and shouting and having that emotional high that comes from being in one of those kind of church services. But every single Sunday, nothing is changing. This is ridiculous.
Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to Shit You Don't Want to Talk About. I'm here to get the conversation started. You're here to get uncomfortable. It's your choice to be a part of the change, changing shit you don't want to talk about into shit to talk about. Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to another episode of Shit You Don't Want to Talk About. Please welcome Ty. And what shit do you want to talk about today, Ty?
I want to talk about deconverting from Christianity.
Ooh, and that is quite a big topic. Can you tell us a bit about what that means to you and who you are, how you got to this point of the shit you want to talk about?
Yeah, after spending about 30 plus years wrapped up, diehard Christianity, I walked away from it. And it's been a 20-year journey to really do the work and really reconnect with myself and with my own spirituality. And now I am pretty excited about helping other people who are finding their own spiritual path and finding their own spiritual way.
Thank you. And where to start? Because I know before this we were talking about a lot of different ways we could take this. I
Mhm.
am curious because this is a question that I have been asked before as well. What is the difference between religion and spirituality?
Oh, wow. Religion to me is based on a man made structure, dogma, belief system. And it usually has some form of organization and some form of hierarchy that's very much man based, right? We put this structure in place, we put these people in place, and we are a religion, we are a group, we have rules, we have regulations, and you got to follow it to be part of this religion. And I don't think that spirituality has religion, right? Spirituality is above and beyond a man-made rule or way of being and way of thinking, and you got to do it this way, you got to follow these rules. That's not spirituality to me. Spirituality for me is really being able to connect with our own sense of the divine, the creator, whatever you want to call it. But I believe that there's something in us and through us. Do I have all the answers? Absolutely not. What I do know for sure, for me, is that Christianity is not the answer to spirituality.
That hits home for me. And I I know I mentioned it to you, but on season 1 we did an episode called the with the host of the Cult of Christianity and went into more. He studied a lot. He studied theology.
Mhm. You
No,
got it right. Yeah.
okay, and the history of religion and what he was planning on becoming a pastor, and we went a lot more into what went into religion to, and a lot more about the uh,
You said it
colonization,
right. Uh-huh.
and those
Mhm.
type of things. And so I don't want to spend too much time on that. And anyone listening, if you want to go check it out, we'll put it in the show notes. But one thing that even before this, I mentioned, and for our listeners, as a heads up, I am not always best at my calendar. I have a very busy calendar, but I'm not always the best and I forget when things start. And then I turn my phone on do not disturb because I get too many notifications and then I forget that I had an appointment. It doesn't work very well. And I was late to the intro call with Ty, and I'm so used to being reprimanded on like why am I wasting
Mhm.
time, or like why am I wasting God's time and those type of things. And Ty was so kind and gracious that it made me think of a question that we talked about previously, was what does Christianity and fear-based religions do to people? Could
Oh,
you
wow.
go a bit into that?
The first thing that comes to mind is my experience with my daughter, which kind of spawned, this journey. At the time, she was maybe about 4 or 5 years old, and no, not 4 or 5. She's maybe around 7 or 8 years old, and I had taken her to a church. Now, before this, though, before she was born, I had thrown away all my Bibles, right? And I'm talking about I had like 5 or 6 different Bibles. I had Thomas Concordance chain reference Bibles that were, this is how you look up the Hebrew words and the Greek words, and you really get into the meaning of the Bible. Like I was like deep into it. I had hundreds of books. Charles Stanley, all these guys, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Oswald Chambers. I got this huge library of Christian books, and I got rid of all of it. And I said, I really want to know you for myself. That was my simple prayer. Started me on this journey. Um, and so, even though I had stepped away from church services, I took my daughter because I'm like, okay, well, I need to kind of give her something, right? Because you don't want, a spiritual vacuum for a kid. But I'd taken her to this church, and these people were screaming and shouting and jumping, and my daughter's face was terrified, like pure terror. And I took one look at her and I said, we got to go. And here's what I realized. I'd grown up in such a fear of religion, right? If you don't believe, you're going to go to hell. The devil is out to get you, and you got to stay prayed up, and you don't want to do the wrong thing because you don't want to, lose your salvation. You don't all those things, all this fear. God is He loves you, but you got to follow the rules. And it had been so much fear. And in that moment, I realized I don't want my daughter to know God from a place of fear, but I'd spent so much of my life that way. And, just realizing how much of what we grew up with in terms of Christianity, in terms of church, was based on fear. You don't want to go to hell. You don't want people to disapprove. You don't want to get judged. You don't want people to be mad. You don't, it's don't. And I think that takes a toll on so many people's self esteem. It takes a toll on how we really connect with who we think created us. And I'll never forget this, Jen. One day I was meditating slash praying. I didn't have a word for it at the time. And I heard as clear as day, what if we've never seen you as anything but whole? And the waterworks just came, because what I grew up with in that fear-based tradition was you were born a sinner, you're unholy, you're unworthy, you're not righteous unless you believe in God, and then He takes away all your sins. But without that, you're nothing. And that's what I believed about the person that created me, that I was created this as a sinner. That's how I came into the world, and I was just so unworthy. And the minute that perspective shift about what if we've never seen you as anything but whole? And I thought to myself, could you imagine what people would be like if they had a perspective that whatever created them only ever saw them as something that was whole, never saw them as less than, never saw them as unworthy, never saw them as sinners that need to be saved by grace and sacrifice? How would we live? How would we be? And that to me is a difference between this fear-based thing where I gotta get it right, I gotta do this, I gotta work, I wanna be saved, as opposed to I was created divinely and I'm seen as whole. And how would we walk and how would we live and how would we be if we kept that perspective?
Damn. I'm a little stuck on which way to ask questions on this. It's so much of what you mentioned really hit me in a big part of what I've had a hard time deciphering about what to do with a podcast of I had like doing the previous episode like I talked about earlier, and now this
Mhm.
is a lot of it does have to deal with my own journey because I'm like, what if I have somebody from Islam on the show, and someone who's Islamic and being able to talk about being Muslim, and then what if I have somebody that's Jewish on the show? And what I've come to realize is a big reason why I'm more interested in that was because I've met people like g- this is definitely an overgeneralization, and there aren't not all, and by any means I wouldn't say all Christians are bad and vice versa, all other religions aren't all good, but my overall experience of these people have been. And I've really struggled with the fact that I've never growing up, I was always like, you have to go to church. Like I was told, you have to go to church. You're going to be in trouble. Like you have to, in the religion I was in, did tithing. So you have to pay your tithing.
Mhm.
If you don't pay your tithing, like you're going to go to hell. Like you're not going to go to XYZ. You're not going to get everything. And then I would meet these other people from other religions that were like, yo, dude, you want to talk about it? Cool. Whatever. Whatever. You want to talk about it? Like, great. And they would have these, yes, they might be more uh complex practices, meaning that there might be more steps than I was used to and growing up in Christianity, yet they would be like so accepting of themselves doing their what they did for religion and still accepting me as I was,
Mhm.
not trying to make me be what they do in religion. And I was like, what is this? That's why I'm what? You're not gonna, like,
Mhm.
force me and guilt me into going to church with you? What?
Yeah.
What? And something that you called on I loved how you, um, talked about what if we were just whole? And
Mm.
for myself experiencing talking to these other individuals who just saw me as whole, like, I'm my own human, I can do what I want, and it's not going to the Holy Spirit isn't going to leave me if I do too many things wrong. I was like, you mentioned uh praying or your meditation and then coming to this fact of like what or question of what if we were just whole. How did you start distancing yourself from the the day in day out that a lot of religions are? Because
Mhm.
we talked a bit about the free time. And as much as, yes, I think there's more time available when we take something out of our lives, but also changing that mindset to being okay with not being as, for myself, a lot of it was like almost codependent.
Mm. Yeah, when I was in college, I clung to Christianity, partly out of fear. Well, actually, a lot out of fear, right? Because I didn't know what else, to do. But that was a time when my calendar was most booked. I was in college for 5 years. It was a school that had a 5 year kind of program. So it wasn't, like I was just kidding around or something like that in college. But the entire 5 years, I did not attend a single party other than the orientation welcome event. I was in college for 5 years in Philadelphia. And my life was Sunday morning church service, most often a Sunday afternoon church service, you know, Bible study on Tuesday, choir rehearsal on Wednesday, gospel choir and the white Christian fellowship on Thursday, the black Christian fellowship on Friday. Saturday was choir rehearsal. And that was my life for about 5 years while I was in college. That's all I did. Outside of school and work. And when I stopped that, um, a lot of my time, a lot of my time was mine again, but there was also a tremendous sense of isolation because I'd spent so much time in that community with those people. Um, and so now I didn't have that anymore. And I think that's one of the hardest things if you've spent a lot of time in a church, in a community where all of your relationships or the majority of your relationships are based on those people. And then you step away from it, it becomes very isolating and it becomes very lonely. Um, so I do remember that period of time where it was just, I spent a lot of time by myself thinking and rethinking. And I went through a really, really bad state of depression, um, and trying to figure things out and not having answers, not having people to talk to, because not only were my friends all, Christians in church, but my family, my mom, and her five sisters. My grandmother was an evangelist. My grandfather was a deacon. So, I mean, when I say I grew up churched, my family was church. Like, I cannot remember a single family wedding where there was alcohol and dancing. Yeah, we just didn't do that because it wasn't a godly thing to do. Right. And so that's kind of how I grew up. And so that isolation, when you don't believe that anymore, when you choose to walk away from that, it was really hard thing to do, but I'm so glad that I made that decision.
When you started to stop going to these events, did you slowly start going away from them, like, one by one, stop showing up? Or
Mhm.
was it like you gave it almost like an announcement, like, "This isn't your thing anymore"?
No, I didn't give an announcement at first, and I remember I had stopped going to things, and there were a couple of young women that I had gone to college with, and we had also gone to the same church that came to talk to me about, you should really be involved in this and you should come back and don't do this and don't do this. And I just kind of gave them the riot act. I'm like, I've been struggling with certain things for this amount of time for these years, and you never came to talk to me about the things that I was struggling with. But when I stopped going to church, this is what you come and talk to me with. You want me to come back to your services and come back and be a part of your team. But all the things that I've been dealing with and working through, you never once stopped to have a conversation with me about that. And I still remember that, like right now. Like, I remember how angry I was that it was more of a concern about the ministry and, oh, you need to be here because we're concerned about your soul. I'm like, I've been showing up every Sunday, depressed and dealing with stuff, and you were never concerned about my soul as long as you saw me leading worship or on stage or doing the things that the church wanted me to do. Nobody was ever concerned about that. But now, because I'm not showing up, you're concerned, and there was so much anger about that. And with my family, it was a little bit more, um, how can I say it? It was subtle and not subtle. One of the things that I did was I actually moved away. I moved to a whole different geography.
Oh, damn.
Um, yeah, and part of it was because um I needed to have that separation. I couldn't be and I couldn't become anything else as long as my family saw me as A, B, or C.
Mhm.
And so that distance, you know, kept me from some of it, right? Kept me from some of the questions or those kind of things because I wasn't going to the same church because I couldn't geographically go and show up. So that gave me a little bit more space with that.
We had a two-part episode with, Todd Libby, and he talks about how having to change his complete community because he was recovering from being an alcoholic. And it's interesting hearing that as well, like having to disassociate from communities in general that are unhealthy for us, having to like possibly physically move to get out of it. I am really curious because this is something that I've heard a lot of people, I could say, dabble in Christianity,
Mhm.
for the band, for the choir, for music in general.
Mhm.
Were you able to find that kind of community, at least to be able to fulfill the music side of things outside of church?
It never really was about the musicality of anything for me. It was the fact that I was leading worship, that I was, corralling people, me being part of like the discipleship team and that kind of stuff. It was never about the music for me, so I didn't need that part of the community. I didn't miss
Mhm.
that part of anything, you know.
That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
at some point, though, what I realized was the music was really more about the emotion and the some to some degree kind of like the brainwashing, with things. And so that what happened is that became an immediate turn off to me because I realized that we're singing these songs and we're attributing this worship, and it's all a lot of it is an attempt to get the dopamine rush, right? To get that emotion flowing. And you do feel something when you sing because music has that ability. And we attribute that ability to God. But the reality of it is, you could be in a hip hop club dancing and have the same kind of emotional connection experience to a song that you do in a church. Same thing.
yeah, and you going through this, it's always interesting, recording these episodes 'cause, I'll have, like, people are talking, I'm like, "Oh, shit, I just remembered something that I wasn't planning on remembering." Uh, there was a time where I lived with some family, and they did definitely get me out of a really hard spot that but to live with them, I was required to go to church
Mhm.
and accept Jesus, and I ended up going to the church I found was a non-denominational, and it had, the music and the band, and I'd never felt so lonely in
Mhm.
a sea of people. Nobody knew I existed, nobody ever acknowledged my existence, nobody and I went
Mhm.
there for almost a year,
Wow.
and it was one of the loneliest things I had ever done, and I'd always hear people say that they love church and they always wanted to go, and I'm like, You know what? It's not my cup of tea." When I went through some abuse as a kid, I even told church members and they ignored it,
I'm so
and
sorry, Jen.
were yeah, it's something that I I personally want people to hear about how you started deconverting and things because to me, it was always like I never really much liked religion. And it was
Mm.
pretty easy for me to be like, nah, I'm too good with religion. Goodbye. But for others, they go through these experiences and they they don't know where to turn. When I remember instances of if girls didn't dress modestly, and this happens outside of religion as well, but it was specifically like if young men made advances, it was still blamed on the women, even if they
Mhm.
were completely modest.
Yeah.
And I'm I'm curious on you learning to you went a little bit into like how this affected those around you with some people trying to come up and save your soul and going to moving away to detach a bit from your family doing this, but what was the dynamic in your family when they realized you weren't going back?
Um, I think by this point I had become a little bit of a black sheep in my family. We had I had a lot of questions, and I had a lot of anger because I wasn't getting answer to the questions. And it wasn't just about Christianity; it was about a few things that were happening, and that had happened in, my family. And so it wasn't. How can I say it? Um, there wasn't like this big come to Jesus moment for me, with my family in terms of you don't believe anymore. Because I just had enough conversations that they kind of just started to know that she's not doing a thing, and nobody bothered me. However, I do have a family member. I have a little brother. My brother is a Grammy nominated Christian hip hop artist, who has preached all over the world. And I'm talking like from Australia to, Indian, Native American reservations, right? But preached all over the world, written books, graduated from Bible college. And while he was in Bible college, that led to him deconverting. And that really shook my family because, when we would go, and have family dinners, we'd have family Christmas and family Thanksgiving and family Easter dinners and those kind of things. He was the one that everybody would look to pray over the food, right?
Oh, wow.
Because he's just doing so much of God's work. And oh, you're so this and you're so that, and they had a lot of esteem for him. And so when he stepped away, that created a lot of really interesting conversations. And it's interestingly enough because I deconverted first, and at some point, knowing that the work that he was doing and knowing the ministry that he was in, I was hesitant to talk about it in public, like spaces like on Facebook and those kinds of things, because I didn't want his followers to think that his sister was like this heathen,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and so and so it was really interesting, when I did a whole podcast, with him because he actually has a podcast, and it's a great resource for anybody looking to have on their own journey of deconversion, because it specifically focuses on that topic. Um, but he says, he got to a point where we would have these conversations, and I had no idea that he was deconverting during this time. But we would have these really intense conversations, and he said at some point he got to a place where he just could not bullshit me anymore. Right? He stopped trying to tell me these answers that he had learned in school, or that he would give to other people, because he was like, you know what, I can't do that to her. It doesn't. The answers that I'm giving her don't make sense. You know, and so watching him go through this, has been really interesting, because so many people, man, I listened to your music and I became a Christian because of you. I followed because of you. I read
Oh,
your books.
wow.
Yeah, and he had such a heavy heart. Like he toiled with this for like years, like I'm talking like 5, 6, 7 years, um, because of that, because he felt the weight of how many people he had brought into this, and now knowing what he believed about it, he felt responsible, for all those people that he had brought into something that he no longer believes.
You said that your family had a hard time and had a lot of conversations around that because of him deconverting. How did that affect you and your relationship with your family if he was it almost makes it sound like he was almost the golden child and
Yeah, he
having that
was a
fall?
little. Well, I think people were disappointed, and whether it's in my family or people that knew him and kind of grew up with him, I'm praying for you. I'm praying that God still loves you, and a lot of those kind of things, which, is very annoying to say to a person who has declared that they no longer believe in that, for you to now tell them I'm praying for you, and God still loves you. That's very annoying. So, for those of you that are listening, if you know somebody who's going through that, please don't continue to say those things to them, because it's not helpful, at all. But the conversations, there was some disappointment and there was a lot of questions. Um, and I will say this, that the conversations that my brother and I have started to have, we actually were able to pull that into our family. Um, I share a lot about my journey and a lot about things, on social media. And I'm a big believer of practicing what I teach. And maybe about a couple of months ago now, we have a family chat, right? Just for family. We always text about birthdays and, who's going to cook for Easter and all that kind of stuff and game night. And I wrote in there, I said, I experienced something when I was younger, right? Had some abuse, stuff. So we share that, kind of connection. I said, I experienced this and I'm still trying to navigate my way through this.
Mhm.
And I said, I needed to say this here with you because it is ridiculous to me that I can talk about some of these things on social media, but I cannot talk about it with this family that we have these amazing game nights and we have these amazing dinners, but I cannot talk about the things that matter. I don't think that's right. And starting that conversation in that family thread, I was expecting the worst because, like I said before, I've probably been a black sheep. She's always going to call it out, or she's always going to, say something. She can't let things rest, kind of thing. But it ended up being something where my brother and I both got the opportunity to not let our family sweep it under the Christian rug. That's why I
Mhm.
gave it to Jesus. I prayed about it and da 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 da. Da. No, 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 no. This isn't something
Yeah.
that you sweep under the Christian carpet. This is something that's real that we've not talked about, we've not addressed. And I had aunts and people who had been quiet and cousins actually start sharing about things in their experiences. So it turned out to be really healing spot. And I'm not saying that, it was like people deconverting or people coming to Jesus all over the place. It wasn't anything like that. But I say this to say, I'm sharing that to say that being able to have those hard conversations about deconverting, about why we're choosing X, Y, and Z, about what we need to be able to have those conversations with the people that matter most to us. So whether it's deconverting or anything else, if you're trying to live authentically and you're trying to really heal, but you cannot have those deep conversations with the people that matter most to you, that is a really, really hard place to be in. And it takes guts and it takes courage. But it was well, well worth it for us to have those conversations and continue to have those conversations.
Thank you for going into that. I realized that I don't think I asked my last question exactly the way I wanted to, yet
Mhm.
also got a good response from it. I'm an only child, and I've always been the one that I'm like, if my family and I can't be respectful to each other and respect each other's like views, I'm like, okay, we're done. Like, that's just who I've been my entire life. And that's not something
Mhm.
that a lot of people are willing to do, want to do, anything like that. I, in a more direct way of asking this, because you were the first one to deconvert, did your family blame you for your brother? And
Oh
did that
no.
that's cool.
Yeah. No, no, not at all. Not no, not at all, because they watched him go through it. They watched him go through seminary. And my brother, he did a really good job of having those conversations with people, like one-on-one conversations with people and kind of sharing about where he was and what his journey was. And quite honestly, I don't know if I ever officially came out to my family as deconverted. What more the real thing that happened was I was so geographically separated that they didn't know anything about my life,
Okay.
right? They didn't know anything about my life. And then when we would have conversations, I would kind of be like the ant or the mosquito bite, because when they would say something, I would question or challenge it. Oh, here she go
Mm-hmm.
again, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they would probably want to leave the conversation alone. Um, and so, yeah, sometimes I would, start a conversation because I did want to pick the scab of something that we needed to talk
Mm-hmm.
about as a family. But that was just more because I refused to. I don't like the idea of not being able to be who I want to be. And I've worked really hard. And again, if I can't be all of who I am with the people that matter to me most, then what am I doing? Right?
Mhm.
And that was just how I decided to live and how I decided to be.
Thank you for going into that. Uh, you had conversations with yourself and you had conversations with your family, and this might be taking us a bit backwards to a previous part in the conversation. Are there What questions did you start to ask yourself, and like what were some of the feelings that came up during this journey?
There was a lot of sadness and a lot of anger. Before I got to the place where I kind of threw out everything, I remember um, in church. And I've dealt with depression for years because there was abuse, there was trauma, there was all these things, that weren't being addressed, that were never being addressed or talked about or dealt with. And so, of course, you're going to have depression. Of course, you're going to have things that trigger you and go on, and do those things. And so dealing with that. But I remember I got to a point where I'm looking at the women in the church that I was a part of. And every single Sunday, it was the same thing. Women, the same women coming to the altar, coming up for prayer. God, please pray for my husband. My husband's not saved. My children aren't saved, and they're cutting up, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Please help me with a job. Help me get a car. Help me get a husband. Help me, help me, help me, help me, help me. Every single Sunday. And it got to the point where I said, are you kidding me? If we're coming to this altar every single Sunday, we're getting people laying hands on us, people putting oil on our heads, we're, dancing and shouting and having that emotional high that comes from being in one of those kind of church services. But every single Sunday, nothing is changing. This is ridiculous. And then I looked at my family, and like I said, on my mother's side, five sisters. My grandmother was an evangelist. I mean, she was the vacation Bible school lady and, praying like long prayers and always Jesus this and Billy Graham and Jim Baker and Jerry Falwell. I mean, that was all I knew of her. And at the same time, when I looked at my family, out of those five siblings, six sisters, if you include my mom, and six siblings and 11 cousins, two marriages that are intact, and only one family that had kids while they were married. Everybody else, out of that whole gaggle, we've all had kids out of wedlock, all broken marriages and broken relationships, all kinds of things related to addiction and all kinds of stuff. And I sat to myself and I said, so this is what all that prayer got my family.
Oh, wow.
Right? We've been doing this for how long? My grandfather was a Mason in the Baptist church. My grandmother's an evangelist. She's got these long prayers. This is the result of that God you've been praying to for all this time. I don't want that. There has to be something different. And that's what got me to that place of I was so angry, right? We're putting all of our trust in you. We're doing all these things. And it's not bearing any result. It's not bearing any fruit. This cannot be real. I need to know for myself. And that's when I got rid of everything. And that was my simplest prayer. I want to know you for myself. I didn't know it was a you that I was talking to. I just knew that there was something different than what I'd been exposed to. And that was, that's what got me there. And then it became this anger. And then the more I thought about things and the more I read things and the more I started looking at things from a logical perspective, the more angry I got. Right. And I had to really get in touch with, allowing myself to be angry. Like when I started looking at, one of the examples, I used to have this conversation with my mom, and I know I used to torment her because she's such a believer. Like my mom to this day, I'm 51. My mom is 72. To this day, if there are more than 5 curse words in a movie, my mom will get up and walk out. Like
Okay.
we'll be sitting here as a family watching, watching something. The 5th cuss word, she's gonna go start cleaning something somewhere. That,
All right.
that's, how she's lived her life. Um, and I said to her, we had this conversation about Job. And I don't know if you know the story of Job in the Bible, where Job gets tested, you know, because the devil comes and talks to God and says, Job only worships you because you gave him all this stuff. If you took all his stuff away, Job would curse you. And so what does God do? He takes all Job's stuff away. And I'm not talking about like just like houses. He like Job's children are gone,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So he
Yeah.
takes away all of his children. And I said to my mom, I said, but what about Job's wife? She had absolutely nothing to do with this. And now all of her children are gone. And I will never forget what my mom said. She said, yeah, but God gave him more children after that. I said, are you fucking kidding me?
That's like taking you and your brother away and saying, "You'll have more."
Exactly. Like she had nothing. Why would you take her house away and her children away? Why would you take everything away because the devil wanted to see if Job would still worship you, but you're an all-knowing God who already knows that he would. What did you have to prove to the devil? And why would you take all of those lives away as if they were nothing to prove a point that you already knew the answer to? And the fact that his wife's kids were now gone, imagine grieving, because I think he had like 7 kids. So imagine you are now grieving 7 children as a mother. And I said, that makes sense to you? That God would be that way? How does that make sense? And so there's a bunch of stories like that when you look at the Old Testament that just don't make sense of a God who you say is loving and a God who is all knowing and who is all powerful. And that's how he operates. So there was a lot of anger when I started looking at those stories and questioning, like, I'm not buying that. That's not love. Another example of that is the story of Abraham, and when he takes his son Isaac. And there's this gospel, and going back to the songs you asked me about, there's this song that we used to sing about Abraham taking his son to the mountain. And that whole scenario is God tells Abraham to kill his only son. So he takes him to the mountain. And as Abraham is getting ready to sacrifice and kill him, God provides a deer that's caught in a bush and says, okay, you don't have to do it. Just sacrifice the deer, or, sacrifice the thing that's in the bush instead. And all I could think about was, imagine you're the kid and you see your father like this because he's heard from God. And I thought, the kid would have nightmares. The kid would be traumatized by that. But that's the story we teach to talk about Abraham's faith. He trusted God so much. He was willing to take his kid and kill him. And just in the nick of time, God provided something else.
Sounds like a master manipulator.
It's when you think about some of the stories that they tell us that makes this almighty God, it just doesn't make sense. It
Yeah.
really doesn't make sense. So there was a lot of anger. There wasn't as much confusion as much as there was anger, and then there was sorrow because, okay, if I don't believe this, what is there? You know? And I felt like I needed something to believe. I needed a book, right? You can't be
Yeah.
without a book. I remember the funny thing is, I remember when I first made that decision, and this was in Minnesota, when I was living in Minnesota at this point. This was after the situation with my daughter at the church. I had left the church, but I hadn't left Jesus, so to speak. But by this time, I had said, no, I'm not buying any of it. I don't want any of it at all. And somebody sneezed. And I was like, well, what do I say? Right? What do I say? Who do I pray to now? What do I do? And so there was a lot of me trying to figure things out. But I'll tell you this too, there was a lot of peace, and I did not expect that. There are two situations where I got peace. So you mentioned this about, your experience with, Jesus, and, you got to believe or you're going to go to hell if you don't do X, Y, and Z. And so for a long time, forever, the time I was saved, I would always think that if I did something wrong or if I committed a sin, that meant that maybe I really wasn't saved. So how many times did I keep going up to the altar asking for forgiveness? Because if I was really saved, I wouldn't have these thoughts. If I was really saved, I wouldn't do X, Y, and Z. So I must not be saved enough. And the day I threw away all the Bibles and threw away all the books, that was the first time I did not have a single question about my spiritual health.
How did you learn to trust yourself and trust the new feelings compared to the
Yeah.
brainwashed feelings?
I kept looking for evidence. I kept looking for evidence. And once and part of it is you really do have to let go of what it says. I wrote a poem about this, and one of the things that the Bible and that they teach you, and it literally says, lean not to your own understanding. Don't trust what you think. Die to yourself daily, right? That's what we're taught. And once I took that out of the equation, okay, yeah, no, I'm gonna lean to my understanding. I'm going to use my intuition. I'm going to use my common sense, and I'm going to take a look at the evidence. What does the evidence say? You talked about, the majority of Christian folks that you've encountered, and I think this is true for a lot of people. And I can say this because I was one of those people. I can't tell you how many people I judged, how many people I was harsh against because they did not believe as I believe. I was telling someone this the other day that when I was in college, I took a woman in religion class, right? And I specifically took that class because I was going to tell those people about Jesus, right? And I was so arrogant and I was such an annoyance that the teacher actually told me, she said, if you just write a paper and not come back to class, I will give you a B. Just
Oh,
don't come
wow.
back to class. And of course, I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm going to show up in class because I got something to say. And right. So I know what that's like when we're so judgmental, we're so critical. Everybody has to toe the line like we toe the line. You have to believe what we have to believe, and we can't trust ourselves because we trust the book. And then we trust all the other people that we're supposed to believe and follow too. And so it did take some time for me to trust myself, but I just kept following the evidence. The second, piece of evidence I had, I went to a Zen Buddhist service. And Jen, I kid you not, I was so prepared for like the sky to open and lightning to strike because I was going to this Zen Buddhism and as a Christian, oh my gosh, you don't do that. And I had another one of those experiences where I walked in and immediately, you're welcome. The most peaceful thing I ever experienced in a communal place. I didn't know anybody there. I didn't have any friends there. I just went to participate and experience it. And the minute I was in that, you're welcome. And it was the most peaceful thing. And I had never experienced that kind of peace when I was in a Christian church. Right? Never experienced that. And so I just kept looking for the evidence. I kept looking for the evidence in the people that I would talk to and the experiences that I had in my own growth. I just kept looking for that evidence and trusting that my prayer was sincere. I want to know for myself. And asking that question of I want to know for myself led me further and further away from everything that I grew up with. And I honestly know that my life is better for that. My daughter's life is better for that. And the beautiful thing about it is that everybody that I'm connected to, they're better for it because I'm better. And I honestly believe that, that's something that, Christianity teaches us that our purpose is to serve somebody else's purpose, right? We're here for the glory of God. We're here to glorify God. You're here to serve other people. And what that teaches us to do is that we never work on ourselves and we never get our own healing because we're so focused on serving other people. And I had an epiphany about maybe 3 years ago at this point where I realized that my main purpose is to become the best person I can be. My main purpose is to become the highest version of myself because when I'm there, everybody wins. Everybody around me wins when I do that work.
you're hitting home with a lot of this stuff and also putting words to so much of what I've struggled with putting words to, and these actually be because I feel like so many of us, when you're in, we could say, even fight or flight mode, you don't always know how remember what it took to get through it, or what
Mhm.
these instances were, or what these small moments are. And telling somebody, just do it because it's going to be better for you, is not a way to get people to, think for themselves and actually dig
Mhm.
deeper. And it's, there are words that I see as, yes, they are religious in origin, but oddly, I think not religious in uh regular vocabulary now.
Mm.
I say that as, and this is something that I used to have a really hard time with, of when I find out somebody is sick and I say I'm praying for them, it's an easy way to say, "Hey, you're in my thoughts." And
Mm.
something that is like more globally accepted.
Yeah.
And saying bless you, that totally makes me go, I'm just going to bless you that somebody has given you, that you've survived your sneeze. Bless you on whatever bless you want to bless with. But it's interesting because when I say, I've used the term come to Jesus, I'm like, I'm not saying go be religious. I'm saying, like, that is a really difficult conversation and you got to, like, face yourself and face what's going on.
Mhm.
And it's it's been hard for me to always be okay with these words still being around me. And I
Mhm.
know that we need to start wrapping up soon, but have you noticed, you mentioned the bless you one when somebody sneezed, but have you noticed struggling with those words, or do you notice those words when they're around you still?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't struggle with them um, as much as I'm very mindful of what I say. Like if somebody posts something online, and everybody's like, "Oh, I'm praying for you," I will say, I'm sending some comfort your way. I'm sending some healing energy your way because that's what I believe. I'm not gonna. There's nothing for me to pray to for you, but I do believe that you could use some healing energy. You could use some comfort right now. You could use some thoughts of encouragement right now. So I'm going to send that to you. And I'm just very mindful of my words because I don't want to be inauthentic. I don't want to
Mhm.
just say it because this is what we're taught to say. But then I'm also mindful too, knowing that everybody doesn't believe, the way I
Mhm.
believe. So that's been the trying to be diplomatic and where they might say, well, how come you didn't say you're praying for me? Well, I'm not praying for you,
Mhm.
right? But I still want to send something to you that I do believe in. So that's probably been the way I've handled those situations. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. And thank you for going into that. Before I go start fully wrapping it up, is there anything you want to talk about that we missed?
Oh, um, one of the reasons why I started talking about this more and more is because we grew up with something, and I don't know if you've heard this phrase, tell the truth, shame the devil, right?
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that started to bother me because telling the truth should never be about shame. Telling the truth is about liberation.
Mhm.
And I wanted to encourage people, and I want more of us to speak our truth because I think it can change and transform lives. It doesn't mean that everybody's journey and everybody's path is the same way, but it does mean that we don't have to hold on to stories and narratives that don't serve us. We don't have to hold on to stories and narratives that shackle us and keep us living less than what we're capable of. And that's what I feel like a lot of religion does. Religion and the hierarchy that we've been given, a lot of it is very, very, very man-made. And I've learned to accept that the Bible is some really good literature. It's really good stories. And it was humans at that time writing about what they experienced and what they thought they were experiencing with the best that they had at that time. They didn't know any different. So the stories and things that they had to make sense of their world, it fit then. It does not fit now.
Thank you for that. Um, I mean, one of the next parts, and I feel like you talking about changing our mindsets almost went into it, but do you have words of wisdom for our audience or something you wish you told yourself when that would have helped you get through this?
Yeah, ask more questions. If I wish that somebody would have encouraged me to ask more questions. And I hadn't been so afraid to question things. I spent so many years, um, you know, chastising and judging people who didn't believe the way I was and didn't believe the way I believed and who were sinners and going to hell. And I wish I would have asked more questions. I wish I would have been more curious instead of criticizing or judging people. And I really that's a big piece of wisdom is to have more curiosity. And even now, when I'm writing things and I'm sharing things and people don't agree with me, and there are people that try to come to my rescue and say, "Well, that's not what time meant," and da 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 da. And I respond to say, I get it because I was where they were. And if I believe like they believe right now, I'd probably have the same attitude. I'd probably have the same judgments. I'd probably have the same harshness. I'd probably be just as defensive as they are because my life is staked on this stuff. Right. So I get that. So what I've learned is, and what I wish I would have learned earlier was how to stay curious and how to have more compassion for people.
I love that. And I I love how you went into earlier about learning to trust yourself and when things felt right and being welcome to do things. I I was at a workshop once and someone mentioned there's a difference between uh, I don't remember exactly how she said it, but um join us or you're welcome. Meaning like join
Mhm,
is more of like a forceful thing where welcome leaves it
mhm,
to the opinion or the option of whoever is receiving it. Of the
mhm,
same with like giving something and offering something. Giving is like making them take it, offering is giving them the choice.
mhm,
And that really hit me while you were saying that you were welcome somewhere because I was like, "Oh, huh.
mhm,
That that does make such a big difference." And thank you for that. I
mhm.
Is there what resources do you have for the audience and how do people reach out to you?
The best way to reach out to me for this topic is to follow me on Facebook. I talk about a lot of this there. I talk about business stuff too, but I talk about a lot of this there. And I've got some things that are in the works, but I do have two really good resources there from two sides of the same coin. Like I mentioned, my brother, he's actually written a book called "Let There Be Gaslight." Um, I watched him pour through 70 plus different books to really do research on, taking apart the stories in the Bible and the history and the accuracy of things and really, really like do deep dives into it. And Let There Be Gaslight is amazing at unearthing where the stories came from, where the history came from, like really pulling things apart. So that's a resource. If you're that kind of person who you need the statistics, you need the science behind it, right? You need that kind of proof to kind of, make you question or to inspire you to look at things differently. On the opposites, on the other side of that coin, I recommend Jim Palmer. I've recently come across his work, but the short story about Jim Palmer, he has he's on Facebook too. Both of these guys are on Facebook. Brady Goodwin is my brother. He's on Facebook, but to be Gaslight, and then Jim Palmer, he was a pastor at a pretty big church, and he walked away from it. And he's got a lot of writings that compassionately talk about, like some of the things that he's written recently talk about, why Jesus wouldn't be a Christian, right? Or how the things that we teach children under the tone of Christianity, how that does more harm than good. And he's got this great, compassionate, but very thoughtful way to approach the teachings that we've been given and the doctrines that we've been given as a religion. And so, as like I say, there are two sides of the same coin. One is this very scientific and logical, and one is this very heartfelt and logical still, but very heartfelt and spiritual path. And I think both of those roads kind of get you to the same place where we think we've got to start asking some different questions, and we got to start saying, yeah, that answer just doesn't make sense. And we've got to give ourselves permission to do that.
Thank you. And I know I'll be definitely checking out those resources. And what is something that you're grateful for?
Oh, I am grateful for, the first thing that came to mind are the folks that love me. I am so grateful to be loved and to be accepted by amazing people. Not everybody gets to have that.
You're right. And I would say something that I'm grateful for is finding out that I'm not alone, feeling that religion didn't serve me, that it really harmed me. And hearing that I'm not alone is something that I'm really grateful for. Thank you for joining Shit You Don't Want to Talk About. I'm here to get the conversation started. It's your turn to continue the conversation. Don't know where to start? Here are a few ways. Rate and review the show, send this episode to someone, and let us know on social media what shit you want to talk about. Bye!